I'd just like to share a strange account now that I have talked about in the past, and probably not in quite as much detail as what I'm going to share now. And it's not really a long story, but it is highly unusual. And I think I'd title it The Invisible Man, because clearly are invisible beings walking amongst us, or beings, people, intelligent others that are able to just kind of pixelate out and vanish. And I think this account gives a perfect example of what I'm talking about now. So for this, I'm going to take us back to January 2020. So we're going back almost 4 years. You know, we're on the crest of 2024 as I tell you this account. And it involves a young man that had been fishing on the beach at Hornesa. His father had taken him down in his car, dropped him off, and would pick him up when he called him later. And it's late evening. Well, we're into the new day. It's 12:10 approximately, so it's 1 hour. He told me it was 1 hour before high tide. Weather and sea conditions were very, very rough. He said it were absolutely raging. The weather was atrocious. And because of that, he sheltered near the sea wall at Hornsey and just tucked himself down out of these conditions and allowed his rod, with probably a glowing rod tip, to do the work. And he checked his watch. I need to stress the time, 12:10 a.m. So just after midnight, 1 hour before high tide. And that's when he noticed, to his, I wouldn't say shock, but surprise, a very small, thin figure walking up the beach towards him. At this point, it's probably, I don't know, 50 yards away. But what caught his attention was we're still an hour to high tide and the sea is almost up to the sea wall. It's such a terrible, atrocious night weather conditions, and it's really stirred and whipped the sea up into a frenzy. So obviously at high tide, he would have had to move off the beach and get further back. So what surprised him was this very thin, diminutive figure is walking along the shoreline, and all these waves crashing. He described it as almost childlike, very, very, no more than 4 foot tall, very diminutive. I asked him if it could have been a female walking up the beach, which is highly unlikely at that time of night. And someone of that stature, almost childlike teenager, you know, it's unusual, but he said there was no sort of suggestion that he could see hips or breasts, nothing, just this straight down figure that was walking. And obviously, if it was human, we would have suggested that it was a woman of very small stature, but he didn't think it was. It was walking military fashion, as in almost like marching as it moved up the beach, completely in black from head to toe, which is fascinating in itself. I mean, even at that distance, if you saw someone walking up the beach, you would, unless they'd got gloves on, you would see that there's a slightly different shade to the hands. If the face is covered with a hood, you would probably see a lighter color near the face. This is just black. And moving in military fashion, which is, I don't know, it's really caught this young man's attention. Well, after a short time of watching this, he felt the urge to stand up, but not to make himself known. He's been crouched down in this position now for a long time in the cold conditions. He just wanted to stretch his legs, but he obviously is absolutely kind of fixed on this figure. And at the exact moment that he stood up, the figure stopped instantly, stopped in its tracks. And although he could see no facial features, we were just looking at this black outline. He said he got the feeling came to him that this thing, and we'll call it a thing now because he's already forming the opinion that this is not human, this is not normal. And he got the feeling that it was shocked, It froze to the spot and seemed shocked that somebody had seen it. Then he said, oh, the most amazing thing really, over the period of about 6 seconds, the figure slowly pixelated, and that's his words for it. It just sort of vanished, just ceased to exist. Fear overcome this young man. Suddenly he got the feeling of dread come over him. I mean, obviously, who wouldn't? You know, this account is telling us that beings or people have the ability to vanish before our eyes. I mean, if I'd seen something like that, I think I'd feel exactly the same. And I think anyone else in this young man's shoes would have felt the same. So he suddenly began feeling really scared, and he grabbed his phone, dialed in his dad's number, or just pressed dad, you know. Can you come right away? Please come. He didn't even explain. He says, I need you to pick me up. And there's an urgency in his voice. Dad only lives 5 to 10 minutes away from where he dropped him off. And remember, it's, what did we say, 12:10 a.m. So just keep that thought in mind. So in the time between making the phone call, it should not have taken more than 10 to 15 minutes, 15 at tops. So, you know, these times are critical to bear in mind. So it's 12:10. His dad should have been there probably 10 minutes after. And as he's waiting for dad to pick him up, he's got his filleting knife, because he's hoping to catch fish, obviously, and probably take them home to eat, cod or whatever, in his hand. And he's scrambling to put all his equipment in his fishing tackle box. I think he's cut the line. He's not interested in reeling the rod in, because along with the fear that's overwhelmed him comes the feeling that whatever it is that has vanished in front of his eyes is there or behind him. Absolutely terrified. You can feel it. Now, is that paranoia? I don't know. Perhaps we'd all feel like that in this young guy's position, you know. And chances are, because of the shock that he felt, this being, this entity, this vanishing human, sort of conveyed him, sort of impressed upon him. Perhaps it was there. Perhaps it was watching him. Perhaps it was outraged, because he felt absolute fear. Packed his gear away. 10 minutes later, Dad arrives. They drive home. This is where it gets even stranger. When they get home, it's 1:37. I spoke to this young man and I got all the times. So if he's correct with the times, 12:10 a.m., 10 minutes for his dad to come and pick him up. Well, 15 minutes if you like, but 10 minutes I would have thought. That's what he suggests anyway. There's 80 minutes of missing time. Does that imply there's 80 minutes of missing time that he shared and his father? You know, I guess we're never going to know. Interestingly, he doesn't recall anything happening in what I would call the time between the time. However, it's highly unusual. It's an incredible account. So I interviewed him, spoke to him at length several times. He did tell me that when he finally got home, they've got a lot of glass around the property of their home, quite a modern building, one-way glass, so obviously they can see in. Anyone on the outside can't see inside the property. But he got the overwhelming fear that whatever he'd seen vanish on the beach had followed them home, and he felt it was watching him. All the blinds were closed on the property, and it made him feel like that for not just a few hours. It made him feel like that for days and weeks afterwards. So I just thought I would share that one with you guys and throw it out there. Has anybody else had a similar experience with a vanishing person, some being, some entity that's got the ability to just disappear before our eyes? And would you be brave enough to share it? Would you think that by sharing it, you're bringing this entity, this being, to the public's attention, to people's attention, something that wants to remain hidden. And it has all sorts of connotations, you know, when you think about people who, we're not saying this thing's dangerous, by the way, but what potentially it could be. And if you were stood on the edge of a cliff and you suddenly fell, who's to say that we haven't got beings like that doing mischievous? It runs beyond the realms of mischief, doesn't it? Doing bad things to people. After all, these stories are few and far between, but they are out there. And if these beings are out there, these people, these entities that are able to just vanish before our eyes, they clearly don't want to be exposed for what they are. So I thought I'd share that one with you, and hope you've enjoyed. Don't forget, if you like what we're doing, please press the like and subscribe button, and thank you.